The name is in the company, right? iDiscover. It's first, it's about discovering yourself, because otherwise you're just shooting randomly for jobs that look good, but without a deep knowledge of your values and who you are and your purpose, what's your natural spontaneous self-expression, it's a bit more a shot in the dark. And maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Teens and AI podcast. My name is Kate and I'm your host for today's episode, which is a little different to usual as we discuss not only AI but EI. EI stands for Emotional Intelligence and is central to the success of the future of AI. A 2019 Capgemini report stated that 74% of executives believe that EI will become a must-have skill in the workplace moving forward, with demand likely to rise sixfold within the next 5 years. At this year's Teens and AI Summer Accelerator, a 3-week global summer camp dedicated to improving AI skills and soft skills in order to use tech for social good, participants will be receiving coaching from iDiscover360, a company which specialises in improving people's self-awareness, emotional intelligence and leadership skills through workshops that take place across the world. In this episode, we speak to Depraz-Brenninkmeijer, who is a partner at the company, about 4 key areas that participants will be focusing on during the accelerator: leadership, resilience, purpose and fear, and how these focus points relate to the world of tech. We hope you enjoy. Ben, it's really great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
So could you maybe explain to us a little bit more about who iDiscover360 are and how you came to engaging with leadership and emotional intelligence in this way?
What we're aiming to create is a school of thought that helps people in the 21st century deal with challenges of modern living in a more purposeful way, in a more fulfilling way. So it's really a kind of philosophy, if you like, but that has very practical psychological applications. So that's for the company itself. For me, I've been involved in it for the past nearly 6 years, after a short stint in investment banking, which didn't work so well. But long story short, there were 3 big periods or pivotal moments in my life. One as a teenager, when someone very close to me struggled with depression. And that was, I would say, my first real exposure to the world of mental health and mental well-being and the stories we tell ourselves and how that impacts our fulfillment. And then in my early 20s, I went sort of simultaneously through a big romantic breakup after a 4-year relationship. And on the other side, this time in investment banking, which was my first job really out of university, and found myself very unfulfilled there and lacking a lot of meaning and purpose. And the reality of it compared to what I expected was very different. These different events, I think, ultimately led me to really question who I was, what I wanted from life, what difference I wanted to make. And that led me into the path of self-inquiry, personal development, purpose. And then from there, leadership is just a sort of adjacent natural field to dive into from that place.
It's something at Teens and AI we're really occupied by because we're helping young people to explore the world of AI, but as much exploring it with those soft skills in mind because they're as important to developing this technology safely. When you're coaching leadership, where do you start from? If someone's having their first experiences as a leader, what should they focus on?
First few experiences of leadership, I would say the focus, you should focus on just learning, because I don't think there's such a thing as a natural born leader. I think it's all experience accumulation. And I think also every person, when we work with people, we quickly let them know that every person's a leader in a different field, in a different way. We tend to summarize leadership as like leadership of people. You have to be in charge. You have to like lead an army or a political party or a company. And that's kind of a very reductive view of leadership, I think, because ultimately it starts with inner leadership, which is how do you lead yourself? How do you relate to your own emotions, your own perceptions, your own decisions, your own actions, what you say, what you do, how much sort of self-awareness you have around that to begin with. From that place, then outer leadership can start to sort of emerge in different ways. And for some people, it will be leading other people. But for other people, it might emerge that they become a leader in really, really advanced technology innovation and in more designing new ways of doing things. And they lead there, but they're not necessarily having to like lead other people and manage in the traditional way. So I would say we always start with self-awareness, with each person, helping them discover more who they are, what's going to be their sort of their unique internal world. And I think when it comes to like leadership or becoming more emotionally intelligent or becoming more having better soft skills, we tend to personalize it very quickly. And we say, oh no, I'm not good at that. I just can't do that. Instead of having the same approach as learning a language or learning an instrument and thinking, well, I just haven't put in the practice yet.
And then how can one reflect effectively on your own leadership techniques? And how can we learn from other good leaders? Once we've established our own maybe habits and patterns and we're developing these skills, how do we continue to develop them as we have more exposure to leadership?
One thing that I found works really well is to keep adopting a neutral exploration attitude about every situation. And by that, I mean, okay, what are the results that actually were not optimal compared to what we wanted at the start? The consequence of that, the next layer is, and what behaviors would need to shift in me for that to happen? If you get into that sort of feedback loop with yourself constantly, you improve very fast. But I say a neutral exploration, because the risk is that people are going to do this and beat themselves up and shame themselves and like, oh, I messed this up. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. How awful am I? And that's really not the point. Yeah, the simplest process I can share right now to continuously continue to improve is adopting that sort of like mirror reflection, which you can do by yourself or as a group with the people who were involved, to just iterate constantly. And that, by the way, in tech is exactly how things happen. You know, when people create codes and work in technology, which I'm not an expert in, obviously, but I coach people who work in technology-based companies and do a lot of coding. And it's a constant iteration process of creating something that somewhat works, but not fully. And then they look back, okay, where are the problems? And then they create a next version, which is improved. And then there's still some problems. And then they look back, where's the problem in the code? And then they create a third version, which is even better, and so on and so forth. So I would encourage people to just adopt that exact same process with anything in their life, really.
And would you say with the people you coach who do work in tech, are there any patterns to the types of things that come up again and again in what they have to improve and what they have to work on?
It feels like humanity is going faster on the hard skills and creating new technologies than it is in terms of like maturity and development of self-awareness and EI and all of these soft skills. So there's a bit of a gap that gets created. And I guess you alluded to that at the beginning. How do we build these technologies safely? It's almost like that's the risk, right? Is that our cleverness takes us further than our sort of wisdom is able to catch up with. The human problems ultimately are kind of always the same. It doesn't matter how smart your technology, how smart your solution, how neat your code, or at the end of the day, it's still going to be an organization of people. It's still going to be a group of people creating this, or it's still going to be people either using it or maintaining it. And so you're going to face the same problems of different interests, problems in communication, people having different values and focusing on different parts of the puzzle, and all of them thinking that the part of the puzzle that they're working on is the most important thing. And so these human challenges and conflicts are just always going to be there. And I think that's where some of the clients I've had, like founders or CEOs and very tech focused, tend to fall short. They go very fast, very far into their domain, and they're excellent and they're much better than most. But then they kind of overlooked the people side, and they overlooked the fact that, well, there's still humans involved, and that ends up slowing them down afterwards because they can't finish their product or they can't really grow their company in the way they want to without cleaning up, if you like, the people side, the culture that maybe has been left behind, or some tensions in the company that were not addressed because it was all about speed and creating the tech.
I think that's really interesting, and company culture is something that has been discussed so much more in recent years than ever before, because even in a tech firm, even where, you know, it's the technology that actually is going to do the thing that your company is designed to do, you're still always going to have people around, and they are not as simple as machines, or at least complicated in different ways. So as you mentioned, you know, there are different types of leadership and ways to get around this. And as we do move into this age where humans are collaborating more closely with tech than ever before to make progress, are there any particular leadership styles or types of leadership that you feel are more important than others, or more relevant than others to the tech industry?
When I grew up, which wasn't that long ago still, we had the style of leadership of like the post-war leadership style, which was a lot more of this alpha male giving orders, you know, instructing, like the stereotypical man in the corner office, and in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I think that's kind of outdated already. I think the world's moved past that. Now the style of leadership that is emerging wants to be a lot more conscious, wants to be a lot more inclusive, wants to be a lot more vulnerable as well. Like Brené Brown in the US is a big reference nowadays in vulnerable leadership, in that she encourages and invites and embodies how to lead in a way where she also owns that she's a human. She's not like pretending that she's got all the answers or that she's always perfect. Or so there is a shift over time, and that's not to say that the more military style of leadership from the 60s and 70s was bad. It was useful for a phase, right? And it's useful for some tasks, and for some projects you kind of need a more directive, real driver in charge. And for other times and in other seasons, you need someone who's actually a lot more collaborative and inclusive, and gathering people and opinions. And leadership is definitely going to constantly evolve. Who knows in 20 years what society will deem to be a great leader. I don't think it's going to be exactly what we have now. And so if anything, I'd like to maybe encourage people to liberate themselves from like, there's a right way of leading. You know, hopefully the path for anyone is a combination of these in a way that works for them.
I think we live in a time where actually we are able to find a balance between those two ends of the spectrum in perhaps a way that we never have before. Mm-hmm. And I think COVID really enabled vulnerable leadership to be something that was more accepted. You know, we were all sitting in our homes, people's kids, pets, dogs, partners did walk into the Zoom screen. And in a way, I think that really helped people, because it reminded them that everyone is just human. Everyone has their own life beyond the workplace. And the second topic that we're going to focus on at the Accelerator is resilience, which I think is something that has become much more of a buzzword in recent years. So I first of all wanted to ask, you know, what does it mean to you? I think many of us become more resilient as certain events in our lives force us to be. So what's the difference between the resilience that you naturally develop through life and the resilience that you can develop more consciously through coaching and training?
I understand resilience as the ability to sort of bounce back when you've been knocked down by events in life that happen. And so the more resilience, the less time you will spend in reactive mode, and the quicker you'll be able to go back in creative mode. That's an easy distinction to remember, because reacting and creating have the same letters. They're just anagrams of each other. So you're either reacting or you're creating. But the work that, we do a lot of in iDiscover is how do you help from there people to, on top of that, proactively take it on, right? Proactively increase that skill of adaptability, be the person that others can sort of look to provide some form of courage to the group or whatever situation you encounter. There's a few ways we can do that. So one of them that we use a lot in our programs is looking back at past negative experiences, whatever they are, events, periods of your life that you stored in your memory as a hardship, as a negative time, as a difficult memory, and simply extracting from them how ultimately you grew thanks to that. How did they make you grow? What did they help you learn? What value came from these events and experiences. And it's really not negating the difficult side, the negative side, which was definitely there. It's just balancing it and seeing that in the challenge comes a lot of growth. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think particularly young people are being given advice and feedback and facing hurdles all the time. So how can we work to make sure that this advice and this feedback is productive? How do you take all of this feedback into account and use it to become more resilient whilst also maintaining confidence in your own abilities?
A friend of mine once said, if someone gives you feedback, they're giving you a gift. You don't have to open the gift. As you mentioned, it's a balance between listening to what people can offer you, because especially as a young person, but I think forever, you want to be in the mode of learning and of a beginner's mind and constantly trying to see, oh, can I do something better? Is there something about myself that I'm not seeing? But at the same time, you also want to have a little bit of a solid foundation inside of you that you can fall back on and rely on, instead of constantly being at the mercy of like what other people say or think about you. So when people give you feedback, just keep a little bit of your attention on this. And so keep filtering it as is this useful? As in, can I use this? Rather than, is this the way I should behave? And because that second way is constantly going to undermine and question your own self-worth, instead of realizing that you have a strong foundation, you have overcome everything that you've overcome so far. You already have skills, and your only potential at this stage in your teenage years, you're only like learning. And so if you can use something, great. And if not, bin it. Like it's not useful for now.
I think definitely actually being given a gift is pretty much always an exciting thing, right? So as long as you can view feedback as something that is exciting, and then from there choose whether it's something you'd rather return to the store or not, it's quite a better way to perhaps approach it, rather than just thinking, oh my goodness, I've done something wrong and someone wishes I'd done it better. That's definitely a really interesting point of view. And our third topic, which I think is probably the one I find most daunting, is purpose and fear, which we'll be looking at towards the end of the Accelerator. And between 2017 and 2019, the share of employees in a Capgemini report on emotional intelligence and AI who believe their skills are or will become redundant due to automation and AI, it's increased by 10% in just 2 years. So it's quite hard to know your concrete purpose in life, so to speak, when the world and the working world is changing so fast. And young people are asked all the time, what would you like to be when you grow up? Society, I think, expects a job as an answer. Whereas I've kind of reverted to just providing emotions like happy or fulfilled, rather than teacher or doctor. But I was wondering how you would approach answering these kind of questions, not only when you're asked them by other people, but actually more perhaps when you ask yourself, what is your desire? What do you want to be when you grow up? Whatever that might mean.
It's a smart answer, what you give. Reverting to emotions. It's a smart way to
avoid, perhaps.
I think this question is so interesting. Like Steve Jobs in 2005, in his speech at Stanford, he said, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So if now I look back, I can trace an explanation as to why I ended up being a coach and what was there in my life that could have hinted to it. But 10 years ago, I could have never told you I want to become a life coach. I wouldn't have the ability to predict. I can explain. I think as humans, we're very good looking back at explaining things, but we're not that great at predicting things looking forward. So instead of that question, I would encourage young people to think about a few different questions. There's many ways, but more, what things currently do you enjoy doing in terms of activities? Very simple. Right? And don't try to fit it into a job box yet. I think it's these expectations that you talked about. Let's avoid that. Like, don't try to fit it into a job. Don't try to think, well, what does that look like? How do I get paid? Just for now, make a list of like all the things you enjoy doing. And this might change over time. You might add new things as you discover new activities, but that's one list. Another one that can be very useful is, what difference do I enjoy making? If you start to map, like, maybe you enjoy making a difference because you paint pictures, and then when people see it, they feel good. Okay, great. So maybe, there's something visual arts related that can be useful. or you like to solve problems for people, or whatever it is. That can be another list of things that is worth, looking into. And a third one is, who are the people that you genuinely are inspired by? And what about them inspires you? Not because you should, like everybody's talking about Elon Musk. You don't need to admire Elon Musk for the sake of it. Just if it's really someone that you resonate, that you would love to, become more like, that can also be very useful to start to see certain patterns. Jobs are only vehicles to try to fulfill ourselves. Some people will be in AI because they love to literally to create technology. Some people will be in AI because they love the social innovation of it. Some people will be in AI because it's very reputable. Some people will be in AI because they're surrounded by really smart people. Like, there's different reasons. And so if you go more for the reasons underneath, then you're less attached to the vehicle. And if it changes, it's fine. If your skills change, that's fine. You can learn new skills. But as long as you've got the direction underneath, that's more the purpose related thing. As long as you've got underneath a direction of things that fulfill you, you enjoy making a difference this way, whether you do it in a bank or in a startup or on a YouTube channel, that doesn't matter that much. That can shift over time.
It's interesting to think about, your purpose isn't necessarily your job title. But I think sometimes it can be scary to think about finding your purpose and knowing your purpose. And is your purpose a concrete thing that you suddenly have like a light bulb moment? So is that fear necessarily a bad thing? How should we cope with being fearful of the future? The world is an unstable place. I'd say, everyone has a right to be a little bit nervous. But how often should someone be taking the time to consider their purpose in life? Is it something I should think about in the shower every morning? Should I take a day a month to consider it? Is there a right way to pursue purpose? And should I allow myself to be fearful?
The overwhelming part of purpose is that people think of it as a destination. Society, we think of it as, what should I end up being or doing? And iDiscover, we don't have that definition. We see purpose as your pure position, which is a way of being right now. It's not what you end up doing. That's more like your vision. These are more like your goals, but your purpose is your pure pose. So for us, as I said, it's not a destination, it's a direction. So it's when you, Kate, walk into a group of people that you feel comfortable with, like family or friends, whoever, it's almost, what is your natural, spontaneous contribution? Like, how do you use your strength to benefit others? Is it that you are maybe you're the playful one, like you make people laugh and you make people feel good? Or maybe you are the one that's gonna like organize things so that people get together. Or maybe you're gonna be the one that just is a team player for everybody else, right? And just like supports them with what they want, what they need. Or maybe you're going to be the one that is more the shoulder to cry on. Everybody goes to you and, you're the confidant. It's like, whatever is your natural way of being that you can't help yourself do. That's what we mean by purpose. It's like, what can you not help yourself, but you do it anyway? So it's not a job. Even I did it in my family. I still do it nowadays. I give people perspective. It's almost like, if I had to summarize it, I could say my purpose is to help people gain perspective and feel more empowered. I made up that sentence. But for me, it's a sentence that every day, whether I'm coaching someone or whether I'm doing a podcast or whether I'm speaking to my brother, I can live that sentence. And so it doesn't matter if I haven't achieved, like, I want to earn this amount of money, or I want to become a world-class coach, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. Even if I haven't achieved these things yet, I can already be purposeful. I can live every day purposeful. So I would really, I'd love, young people listening to this to stop thinking about purpose as a end point and some like dramatic thing that either you find or you're screwed because you haven't, but more as something that is more a spontaneous thing that you anyway end up doing. And that's a constant question mark. Even for me, over the last 5-6 years, I keep every few days, every few weeks, sometimes it doesn't bother me for like a month or two, but I'll come back to it and I'll think, is that really my purpose? And I try to refine it, but it's not, but I still have a good enough working version that I live a life that right now is quite fulfilling. I mean, the name is in the company, right? iDiscover. It's first, it's about discovering yourself, because otherwise you're just shooting randomly for jobs that look good, but without a deep knowledge of your values and who you are and your purpose, what's your natural spontaneous self-expression, it's a bit more a shot in the dark. And maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't. Now, about fear, and I'll talk about fear in general. Fear also is a super useful mechanism. It's not a problem to be fearful. On the contrary, it's a very useful feedback. And it gives you a couple of things. The first one is, and I'll use the word of the mythologist Joseph Campbell. He studied like myth and legends across the world, all around the world. And he looked at all these stories and all these tales and extracted how they're all the same story. And he called it the hero's journey. It's like a sequence of stages that any hero in every journey, whether it's Frodo in The Lord of the Rings or Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, it's always the same story. And I think it speaks so much to us because we recognize ourselves in this. Anyway, long story short, he said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And I always try to remember this when I'm fearful of something. I'm asking myself, what might be the desire that I have underneath that? If I'm afraid of speaking on stage, if I didn't ever want to do it, then why would I care? Why would I be afraid? It's like, it doesn't matter to me. I'm only afraid because there's something about it that I care about. The second piece of where fear is useful is it's showing you that you have incomplete awareness about a situation. So when you say, for example, I fear failure, and I work with a lot of people who that's present for them, right? They have often high-powered jobs, they're executives, they're founders, they have a lot of possible failures coming up with this client, with this product. And so we elicit a clear scenario. Okay, what are you afraid of? Like, let's be more specific. What does the failure look like? And then when they express that, I can see that all they see is the negative side. And again, it's like, okay, the negative side, this all might happen, fair enough. But let's look at all the things that are on the positive side. What will you learn from it? How will you grow up? Who will come and help you? What will you, how will you empower yourself? What difference can you make? As in, maybe you think you can't do anything about it, but actually you have more agency than you thought. So maybe you need to realize that you have more influence than you thought about the situation, and so on and so forth, until they're a bit more centered. And then they can go, okay, actually, it wouldn't be as bad as I thought it might be. And now they're a bit more ready to follow the desire or do whatever it is that they wanted to do.
And I think in the world of social media and particularly in LinkedIn, we often see success and people finding successful purpose as job updates and ultimate productivity at all times. So do you feel like as a society, we have fallen into defining productivity and success in a way that's more pressurizing than productive? You know, what does success look like for you? How can we be productive without perhaps working all the time?
When you go on your LinkedIn feed and you see this people congratulating this person, and all you see is just like a 1 second announcement about the life of this person, an outcome that's being blasted. You don't see all the ups and downs that surround that outcome, before and after, and the stress and all these moments where the person's not fulfilled and things are not working. You don't see any of that. All you see is that snapshot. It's a big illusion to take that at face value. To take that and consider that success is extremely short-sighted and narrow in terms of like perspective. You want to consider that it's more marketing than success. It's branding. That's it. That's the exercise, right? We all like to portray in different ways good things and show pictures and whatever, but it's really not our experience of life. It's not the full picture.
LinkedIn is my job update. It's not my diary.
Yeah.
Two very, very different things.
Exactly. Now, you might not want to, unless you want that to be the difference you make to the world, you might not want to share your diary publicly with like the world. But the job update, it's going to serve you because then other companies might see what you do, etc., etc. So let's create a bit of a distinction between the two. I don't want to give a definition of it because I think based on people's individual values, success will look very different. Success for like for my mom, for example, would be to have raised 4 kids who are now, independent and living their own life and that are fulfilled in their life. That's her definition mostly of success. And I'm not saying that's the only definition of success. She might have other aspirations that are her own, but it was such a high value for her, family unity and family education and growing her kids, that she's going to be successful there. Another woman who had a very high value on her career or her financial security or her independence will experience success maybe as a partner in a law firm, right? And that will be her definition of success. And that's fine. The problem is judging each other, comparing ourselves to other people who have different values and think, oh, I want that success. It's like, yeah, but that's not, you don't really care about that. You just think you should.
This all links onto something we're all trying to avoid, which is burnout. So do you have any advice for people who are trying to avoid burnout, and any advice perhaps for people who feel like they are burnt out?
Burnout is a symptom. It's not the cause. It's just a symptom. It's the effect of something else. So we would always go back to the cause and work on that. I would say the cause is either misalignment. So by that, I mean you are working really hard at something that is not really aligned with your values and who you are and what you care about. So you might be able to push through, through willpower. That's the first cause. If so, again, the work is start to own who you are, start to own more what you care about, and go and do that. Like leave this job or stop studying this particular subject that you don't really care about and you do it to please whoever, and start to do what is more authentic to you. That's the first possibility. The second possibility is a lack of communication, poor or no communication. You're not asking for help. You are not setting boundaries about what you can and cannot do. You are not communicating that your sleep or your exercise is important to you. So nobody knows around you, and you end up working, and then you burn out. So communication is another area where you can practice becoming better at expressing what you need, what you want, making requests, asking for help. And the third one I would just say is, if you're already burnt out, take a break. For now, there's just no immediate other advice I could give than just you need to take a step back to be able to assess a little bit what's going on. But the third point I would just say is self-management. And by that, I mean, I see that a lot of people who ended up being burnt out, a lot of the reason also that contributed to the burnout is worrying and overthinking and spending a lot of time in their heads. Factually, they were fine in terms of like work hours, etc. It wasn't that crazy, but the pressure they had put in their minds was just insane, and that will be draining. And that's nothing to do with the job. That's way more to do with like how you handle your own mental space, and whether you find relief in meditation or in getting coaching or walking in nature. Everybody will have their own thing, but that's more like managing your own mental health more proactively rather than just expecting it to work out is how you can probably prevent a lot of burnout.
But all of this requires, I think, forming habits. And habit forming is something that is much easier said than done. So I was just wondering, what is your advice for someone trying to form a habit? And perhaps what should you do, this is a question for me maybe, when you slip up in habit making?
There's so much out there on habit formation that is all hacks. It's all trying to like, let's speed up the mechanism so that you can create habits and be done with it in like 28 days or 11 days or 60 days or whatever. And I think go back to basics, like when you had to learn to brush your teeth, which is hopefully something you do every day. How did you create that habit? If you're like me, your mom probably repeated to you like hundreds of times, days, weeks, years of like, go brush your teeth, right? And then at some point you just stop thinking about it and you just ended up doing it. So I think this whole idea of like, okay, I need to hack a habit, create it in like 30 days and then I'll be done. Again, it's so short-sighted. Instead of thinking, well, if you want to really build a habit, do it deliberately until you don't think about it anymore. And that might take you 5 years. 99% of the time, you might be off course. But as long as you get back on each time, then I think that's quite close to reality. That's how most people do it. I don't think anyone is 100% of the time on it, that would be an artificial intelligence, not a human.
And I think actually AI has made us think and believe we can have everything faster than ever before. And something I am really taking away from this recording is that if we can just slow down a little bit and just process our purpose, our resilience, our leadership, you will get a lot more out of it long term. And so, of course, we've talked about those three main topics. But finally, I was just wondering, do you think that there are any other particular soft skills that you feel will be vital for young people moving forward and thinking particularly about moving into the world of tech?
I love what you just said now about slowing down. I think, one of the greatest gifts that I was given is, and I was given that gift by being told to be patient. In tech, things are moving fast. Pressure can be high. People can be quick to react. And so if you can develop in yourself that sort of tranquil force of being patient with others, patient with yourself, patient with the outcomes you want to achieve, ultimately, and I heard this not too long ago on another podcast, and I never heard someone say it, but they were saying, in reality, I think it was Steven Pressfield who wrote the War of Art and Turning Pro and different awesome pieces. He said, ultimately, life is long. Which is funny because we always hear the opposite, right? You're like, oh, life is short. Like, you gotta get your bucket list done and go to Machu Picchu and everywhere. And there's obviously truth in that, but being able to put that other perspective on of like, well, actually, life is long. Like, you could explore everything you want for the next 10 years before you get started. You might not even have reached 30 years old yet. And, for some of the young people listening, and you still have at least 60 years, maybe 70, maybe by then 80 years to create stuff. Like, you've got a lot of time. You don't need to make it by the time you're 30. You need to have explored a lot by the time you're 30. So that's where I would end. It's mostly this piece around patience.
Ben, thank you so much for joining me. It has been really, really great to speak with you. I am incredibly jealous of everyone taking part in the Accelerator. I'm sure that they will have a really, really great time exploring all of this.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much again to Ben for joining us, and to iDiscover360 for their support of our Summer Accelerator. You can find out more about them and the work they do in the episode description. We really hope this episode has given you some insight into some of the additional skills you will learn at a Teens in AI event. You can find out more about upcoming hackathons and accelerators by visiting www.teensinai.com. Do let us know your thoughts on emotional intelligence by getting in touch with us at Teens in AI Pod on Twitter and Instagram, where you can find out more about upcoming episodes, which are released every other Thursday. We're also currently looking to expand our Teens in AI podcast team, so if you think you would like to get involved with audio editing, presenting, or marketing, head to our social media to find out more. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great week.